Come to order. Apologize for typical Congress. 10 minutes later, and I wanted to be here. The gentleman from Texas is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Mayorkas, members of this committee, please turn your attention to the video screens.
All Americans, not only in the states most heavily affected, but in every place in this country, are rightly disturbed by the large numbers of illegal aliens entering our country. The jobs they hold might otherwise be held by citizens or legal immigrants. The public service they use impose burdens on our taxpayers. That's why our administration has moved aggressively to secure our borders more by hiring a record number of new border guards, by deporting twice as many criminal aliens as ever before, by cracking down on illegal hiring, by barring welfare benefits to illegal aliens. In the budget I will present to you, we will try to do more to speed the deportation of illegal aliens who are arrested for crimes, to better identify illegal aliens in the workplace as recommended by the commission headed by former Congresswoman Barbara Jordan. We are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. It is wrong and ultimately self-defeating for a nation of immigrants to permit the kind of abuse of our immigration laws we have seen in recent years, and we must do more to stop it.
Mr. Secretary, I can understand why you didn't stand with me and my colleagues and clap. You didn't want to clap at that because you and Joe Biden believe just the opposite of what President Clinton just said. You believe in open borders and complete chaos. Did you notice the bipartisan support in the chamber? As the video was played, everybody was clapping in that chamber. If I were in Congress in 1995, I would have also stood. Because I wasn't, I stand here today. Other than President Donald J. Trump, the greatest president in my lifetime with the most safest and secure border, I believe President Clinton understood just how important border security is to our nation. But boy, oh boy, have times changed. 28 years later, the left has gone off the rails. They've gone completely nuts. They've done just the opposite of what the leader of the Democrat Party, President Clinton, stood for on border security in 1995. This committee's ranking member, he was in Congress in 1995. I assume he stood. It seemed like the majority, if not all of the entire chamber, they stood. Matter of fact, Mr. Clinton delivered his speech in the third year of his first term. And he was reelected in 1996. He beat Bob Dole, won by over 8 million votes, won the Electoral College 379 to 159. He had the support of the American people, and I'm going to assume the ranking member also voted for Bill Clinton in 1996. We have two other members, Ms. Jackson and Ms. Lofgren. They were both freshmen at the time. I will assume they stood during that powerful speech as well. And do you know why they supported and voted? They voted for legislation in 1996 strengthening our immigration laws. I applaud them for that. So what's changed, folks? What's changed with the Democrat Party? I'll tell you what's changed. If you wouldn't have heard President Clinton's voice or seen his face, you would have thought Donald Trump delivered that speech. I don't believe that President Clinton was called a racist, a white supremacist who hated immigrants, as the left and the dishonest media has painted Donald J. Trump to be. Mr. Mayorkas, there's a reason why you and Joe Biden have allowed 5.5 million people to cross our southern border. This is about votes and elections. I have a report from the Heritage Foundation titled, Tracking Movement of Illegal Aliens from NGOs to Interior of the USA. Why do you think NGOs have moved illegal immigrants to 431 of the 435 congressional districts? The truth is, hear me, it's because the Democrats' progressive policies are not acceptable to Americans. Heritage obtained a sampling of approximately 30,000 cell phones that were tracked to NGOs along border states. They tracked approximately 22,000 devices at 20 NGO locations in January 2022. The same devices were later traced to 431 separate U.S. congressional districts, and of the 52 with the highest rate of tracked devices, 71 of them were Republican congressional districts. The report revealed that it's not a coincidence, folks. The flood of illegal immigrants means a continual rise in surplus laborers. That surplus drives down the wages of existing middle-class and lower-class job holders until they leave the job forces, and then they're forced to go on welfare with the hopes that they will become loyal supporters of the Democrats. That's what this is all about. If this isn't about votes, one-party rule, keeping the Democrats in power, I make this suggestion. If you put the American people first, you should refer back to Trump's border policies, but you won't because you hate him. You despise the man. So give Bill Clinton a call, and then he can help you with the border crisis. As President Clinton stated, we are a nation of immigrants, but we are also a nation of laws. You, sir, have betrayed constitutional order, neglected your duty, and violated the trust of the American people. And as a nation of laws, I look forward to your impeachment. That I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Kiley.
Mr. Secretary, last year you testified before this committee that this administration's policies were not responsible for the surge of illegal border crossings. And today you've testified that this administration's policies are responsible for what you claim is a decline in illegal border crossings. So why is it that you deserve credit when numbers go down but not blame when numbers go up?
Congressman, 2 points. One, the approach that we are taking, expanding lawful pathways and delivering consequences for those who do not use them, is working, but I want to communicate that the challenge remains. The challenge is a persistent one on our southern border. It has been for decades, and what we need is
Mr. Secretary, you're speaking in general terms, and I think this is why many of us on the committee are frustrated with the lack of accountability, is that you have shattered all records in terms of illegal border crossings. You say that has nothing to do with the dramatic change in policies you had, and then there's a brief decline, and you cite that as evidence that you're doing a good job. And I think that's why so many Americans have lost faith in this administration's ability to secure the border. But I want to actually reference some remarks you made that I found somewhat encouraging. This was on the topic of detainers. You made these remarks early in your tenure, April of 2021, at a UCLA discussion with the Immigration Law and Policy Center. You said this, you referred to an example of someone who crossed the border illegally and went on to commit sex offenses. And you said, I do not believe that individual should be released into the community. You said, I think the state facility should turn that individual over to ICE directly, and you added, I think that is a public safety need. You went on to say that after such a person had served their sentence, if they were a citizen, there might be no way to keep them out of the community. But you said, I have a tool at my disposal with respect to an individual who unlawfully entered the country. You said, I feel strongly about this. Is it a tool that I have at my disposal? It is a tool I feel obligated to employ. I am going to protect the public, you said. It's a very strong statement in favor of detainers. And yet, over the last couple years, we have seen the actual use of detainers decline dramatically. Fiscal year 2021, there were 65,000. Fiscal year 2022, 78,000. That's about half the average during the Trump administration, about 1/3 the average during the Obama administration. So if detainers are such a powerful tool, why have you used them so sparingly?
Congressman, let me communicate a very important point, that individuals who pose a threat to public safety or national security are detained. That is the immigration policy of the Department of Homeland Security under my leadership.
But why are you detaining much less than your predecessor administration?
Well, one is our detention capacity is limited, which is why we prioritize public safety and national security threats, number one. And number two, detainers are sometimes not honored by particular jurisdictions.
I want to move on to that in a second, but just briefly, has the White House directed you to limit the use of detainers?
Congressman,
that's a yes or no question. Has the White House?
Congressman, no, they have not.
Okay, thank you. So on this topic of jurisdictions not honoring detainers, you have been critical of these so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. In a 2022 speech to the U.S. Conference of Mayors, you said some of your cities have declined to cooperate with immigration authorities in the removal, the apprehension, and removal of individuals, even if those individuals pose a public safety threat. You said, I will be coming to you and asking you to reconsider your position of non-cooperation. The public safety, the public's well-being for which we are all charged is, I think, at issue, you said. So, Mr. Secretary, you agree that sanctuary policies threaten public safety?
Congressman, what do you mean by sanctuary policies?
The definition that you gave right there, where you said the declining to cooperate with immigration authorities and the removal, the apprehension or removal of individuals, even if those individuals pose a public safety threat. Are those sanctuary policies, as you define them, a threat to public safety?
So sanctuary policies are defined differently by different communities.
But to your definition,
if I may,
is it a threat to public safety?
I do not consider it in the service of public safety to release an individual into the community when that individual can be released to Immigration and Customs Enforcement for prompt removal.
Thank you. Do you oppose state policies that forbid local authorities from cooperating with ICE?
I am aware of some that I do oppose.
So you oppose California's sanctuary state law?
I am not familiar with the particulars of that law.
Have you encountered California's restrictions on cooperation with federal immigration authorities?
Congressman, I believe it is imperative that we cooperate with one another. Jurisdictions cooperate with us when it serves the public safety need.
Thank you. I'm out of time, but I would like to restate for the record that the policies you said that you oppose, overriding the ability of local jurisdictions to cooperate, that's exactly what California's sanctuary state law does. Thank you, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for being here. Thank you for your testimony. I know it's been a long day today, and I am certainly grateful to you for your service to our country. And I have some questions about FEMA, and as you may recall, we've spoken previously with respect to some natural disasters that we've faced in the state of Colorado, which I have the honor of representing in the Congress, particularly wildfires, and have very much appreciated the partnership with the department and your sub-agencies. Before I do that, I just want to give you an opportunity. I know it has been a very contentious hearing. To the extent that you'd like to clarify anything or perhaps expound on a prior answer that you didn't have ample opportunity to do so.
Congressman, I very much appreciate the invitation. I can't recall there were quite a number of times I have not been able to complete my responses, but I look forward to the opportunity to answer your questions.
I do think it's important, for those Americans who are watching to perhaps provide them with some context about the various ways in which you've served our country. Maybe you could just talk a bit about, before you were appointed and confirmed as Secretary of Homeland Security, what kind of work did you do?
Congressman, I am in, I think it's my 22nd or 23rd year of federal service. I joined the federal government because this country has given so much to my family. We came here seeking refuge from the communist takeover of Cuba. I began my federal service as an assistant United States attorney, as a federal prosecutor. I worked in that capacity for almost 9 years before I was appointed by President Clinton.
Fighting crime?
Yes.
Taking on organized crime, taking on cartels, taking on gang violence?
Yes. Smugglers, all sorts of crimes. It was the largest federal judicial district in the country, the Central District of California. I was then appointed and nominated, and Senate confirmed as the United States Attorney.
On a bipartisan basis?
Yes, it was unanimous. I returned to federal service in 2009 as the Director of U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, and then moved from that position. After approximately 4 years, I became the Deputy Secretary of Homeland Security. I returned to federal service after that as the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's been about 22 years or so.
Well, I will say, Mr. Secretary, what I said previously. We're grateful for your service in law enforcement. And while we have many disagreements with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle from a policy perspective, perhaps ideological differences, I would hope that they would show you the appropriate respect and recognition of the work that you have done as a law enforcement officer, as someone who's worked in law enforcement for the last 25 years or so. I want to talk a bit about FEMA. As I mentioned, We had in Colorado some of the most destructive wildfires in our state's history all happened in the last several years. And in particular in my district in Colorado, as you'll well remember, the Marshall Fire, which was the most destructive wildfire in the history of our state, economically and tragically. We lost the lives of 2 community members. There have been recent concerning reports that FEMA's Disaster Relief Fund, the DRF, which is the main funding source, as you know, through which you provide support to state, local, and tribal governments responding to natural disasters, is in danger of running out of funding before the end of this year, potentially even next month. I wonder if you can elaborate on what that shortfall is, when you predict it may run out of funding, and how that would impact the agency's ability to support communities in the event of a disaster, because of course there are many of us in Congress, myself included, who are championing efforts to ensure that this shortfall doesn't happen.
Congressman, we are seeing an increase in both the frequency and severity of natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, fires, floods. And the Disaster Relief Fund that FEMA administers is the primary vehicle that enables FEMA, the Department of Homeland Security through FEMA, to distribute individual and public assistance to communities devastated by those natural disasters. If that were to run out, our ability to assist communities, our neighbors, our friends, our loved ones, to recover from and rebuild after a natural disaster would be virtually eliminated, almost eliminated. And we are hopeful that the Disaster Relief Fund will receive the requisite funding, because the money we expect to run out as early as perhaps August.
Well, I thank you, Mr. Secretary. I couldn't agree more, and we will do everything in our power to ensure that that fund is replenished. On that, you have my word. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I thank you for your indulgence, and I yield back.
Thanks, sir. The chair yields to Ms. Hageman for 5 minutes.
Thank you. The First Amendment to the United States Constitution rests on the principle that no person or institution, including the government, has a monopoly on the truth, and that viewpoint-based suppression of speech by the government is dangerous and may even spell the death of a constitutional republic. Under the First Amendment, the government has no power to restrict expression because of its message, its ideas, its subject matter, or its content. As the Supreme Court has explained, if there is any fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is that no official, high or petty, can prescribe what shall be orthodox in politics, nationalism, religion, or other matters of opinion. Labeling speech misinformation does not strip it of its First Amendment protection. That is so even if the speech is untrue, as some false statements are inevitable if there is to be an open and vigorous expression of views in public and private conversation. In refusing to carve out a First Amendment exception for false speech, the framers of our Constitution recognized the significant danger in making the government the ultimate arbiters of truth. And it is axiomatic, in the words of the Supreme Court, that the government may not induce, encourage, or promote private persons to accomplish what it constitutionally is forbidden to accomplish. Secretary Mayorkas, it was reported in May that the DHS, through the Targeted Violence and Terrorism Prevention Grant Program, is funding groups targeting conservatives and equating them to domestic terrorists. Originally intended to combat foreign terrorist organizations' operations in the U.S., it has become yet another government tool weaponized against citizens to violate First Amendment protection protected affiliations and speech. One grant to the University of Dayton for a program titled Prevents O hosted a seminar titled Extremism, Rhetoric, and Democratic Precarity. One of the speakers, a known Antifa member, as part of his presentation shared a pyramid of far-right radicalization, which likened the Republican Party to the Heritage Foundation, the American Conservative Union, Fox News, Breitbart News, the National Rifle Association, Prager University, Tea Party Patriots, the MAGA movement, and the pro-police Blue Lives Matter movement, and the Christian Broadcasting Network as the first steps on path leading to Nazism and militant neo-Nazism, among other appalling ideologies and groups. This presenter reportedly also taught tactics on how to pressure the removal of conservatives from platforms, and he's even quoted as saying, "A lot of things we are doing are illegal, and a lot of it involves breaking the law." Secretary Mayorkas, Does the affiliation with conservative or Christian beliefs make someone a Nazi or a domestic terrorist?
Of course not.
Okay. Then if that's so, why is your agency targeting Americans who are Christians and conservatives?
We are not.
Okay. Secretary Mayorkas, when did you become aware that the University of Dayton was implementing your grant funding program to target conservatives and Christians?
It is my understanding that it is not.
When did you become, so you're not aware of that?
No, it is my understanding that it is not.
You're unaware of the information that has been produced, and have you ever seen the pyramid that it's up on the screen right now?
I learned about the individual speaker's comments with which I profoundly disagree.
Okay, so when did you find out about the speaker's comments?
I don't quite recall, Congresswoman.
All right, well, you know what, Mr. Mayorkas, I actually really want to thank you as well for coming here today, for your performance. I have watched with absolute fascination as you have danced and dodged and lied. Yes, lied. We know you've lied, you know you've lied, but more importantly, the American public knows that you lied throughout your testimony today. And yet you believe that you and your fellow architects of the censorship industrial complex think that you should be able to determine what is and isn't true, and what is and isn't untrue. You are the walking, talking epitome of the very tyrant that our forefathers recognized would gravitate towards government service. And it is because of people like you that they drafted the First Amendment. I thank them for their foresight. I thank them for recognizing that you and people like you would do everything in your power to control speech, to control freedom, to take away our rights. And they've written a document that isn't going to allow you to do that. Unfortunately, we still have courts and judges who recognize that you don't have the power that you are attempting to take, that you do not have the right to limit our freedom of speech, our freedom of association, our right to communicate. Thank God we have the First Amendment so that we can stop you from doing what you've been doing. With that, I yield back.
Your accusations are false.
Thank you. The chair yields to Mr. Hunt from Texas for 5 minutes.
A country without borders, sir, is not a country at all. A home without a roof and a home without a doors, sir, is not a home at all. I have 3 young children at my home. They're all under the age of 4 years old. My home is secure because I lock it up every single night because I care about their safety. It's actually the #1 role of our federal government is to keep our citizens safe. I'm a combat veteran. I'm willing to give my life for that. West Point guy, flew Apaches in Baghdad, and safety is something that's paramount to me. It's actually the reason why I'm in this room right now, is to figure out ways to keep our citizens safe. When you're at your home, sir, do you lock your doors?
Congressman, thank you very much for your service in our military. It's the highest form of service.
Thank you. Do you lock your doors at your home?
Congressman, I take care of the safety of my family.
Understood.
And we in the Department of Homeland Security work every day to protect the safety and security of the American people.
So you would agree that the American public should be afforded the exact same level of safety and security that you provide for yourself and your own family?
That is what 260,000 people dedicate their careers to.
Understood, sir. Can you tell me the number of unaccompanied minors who have crossed our southern border during your tenure as Secretary?
Very pleased to provide that data to you, Congressman.
Okay. I've also heard that there are proponents of this administration that say that the fentanyl is coming across our southern borders, coming through legal ports of entry. Does that mean that no fentanyl is being smuggled across our border other than legal ports of entry?
Congressman, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection data evidences that more than 90% of the fentanyl that enters this country is coming through the ports of entry.
So that means that there are other parts of the border where fentanyl is pouring into our country.
That is precisely why we have dedicated increased resources, both personnel and technology, to interdict more fentanyl in these past 2 years than in prior years.
So I hear that, but I'm really speaking for the American public and the people that are in my district. That's not what we're seeing, because we're seeing an increased number of people being murdered by fentanyl every single day. You understand these numbers, correct?
Oh, I do, and Congressman, those numbers have been escalating for more than 5 years.
But they've escalated exponentially during your tenure. Chip Roy went through these numbers. I was sitting here watching. I'm actually appalled at just how much this has happened.
It is a tragedy, the devastation that fentanyl wreaks on our communities, and I look forward to working with you and with all of the members of this committee in addressing this challenge. This requires a united effort. This is not a partisan issue.
But unfortunately, sir, it's become a partisan issue. And I feel like we on this side are the ones that are truly trying to defend the lives of our fellow Americans. Switching gears on this one. This woman is Kamala Harris. She's the current vice president of our country. She's also the border czar. Now, that was dubbed by your boss. You see, on March 21st, 2021, President Biden tasked Vice President Kamala Harris with solving the border crisis and finding the root causes of illegal immigration because, as Biden said, she is the most qualified person to do the job. I'd like to make a motion to submit this transcript of Joe Biden's March 24th press conference to the record, Mr. Chairman.
So moved.
It's been 855 days since Joe Biden named Kamala Harris the border czar. Has she solved the root cause of illegal immigration, in your opinion?
Congressman, you have mischaracterized the vice president's role. The vice president is addressing...
No, I have not mischaracterized. Actually, that was the job that was given to her by the President of the United States of America. How did I mischaracterize that?
Congressman, the vice president...
Okay, that's fine. So she has not solved the issue. I think that's actually pretty clear, and I think my colleague Chip Roy did a very good job of articulating that. I want to go to my next topic, and this is something that the American public is really frustrated with, because it's been brought to my attention, and I think I've known it for a very, very long time. But for those who are not watching, the Secret Service is an agency that is within the Department of Homeland Security. This has been the case since March 1st, 2003. Now, sir, I'm assuming that you're aware that cocaine was found by Secret Service in the White House a couple of weeks ago. Is that right?
Yes.
According to Secret Service, marijuana was also found in the White House twice last year, twice. And we don't know who brought the drugs into the White House, which is the most secure building on earth. And if we can't secure the White House, then how can we secure the border? And without proper leadership, I am so fearful that we have turned our beloved White House into a trap house. And the American public deserve more, far, far more than that, sir. Thank you for your time. I yield back the rest.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from South Carolina is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, I have listened both in here and in my office today, your testimony before this committee. And I think the frustration that I have as the cleanup crew at the very end of this committee is that you seem to answer very eloquently all the questions that the other side of the aisle pose, but when posed with questions, specific questions about the border on this side of the aisle, you seem to dance and dodge, as Ms. Hageman talked about, the true answers, that you talk about, you filibuster, if you will, what people really are asking. And these aren't questions that are hatched out of some think tank. These are questions that our citizens have because they see what's going on. You know, what's remarkable to me, since day one of this administration, you've terminated construction of the border wall. You restricted the ability of immigration officers to deport aliens who violate U.S. law. You terminated the MPP, the Remain in Mexico policy, despite people on the ground talking about how successful that it was. You abused parole authority to release illegal aliens en masse into the United States and creating categorical parole programs in violation of the ANA's case-by-case basis. You refuse to follow federal law requiring aliens to be detained during the pendency of their asylum proceedings. You terminated asylum cooperative agreements with Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. You refuse to comply with the provisions of the INA that require the detention of asylum seekers. You cut out immigration judges, ICE attorneys, and the process of the asylum system itself. You support sanctuary city policies by giving them grants. You implemented until it was enjoined a 100-day moratorium on alien removals. You have misused, as has been talked about here, the CBP One app that has institutionalized mass parole and release policies in this country. It's been described as a shell game, pretty fairly stated, that you otherwise shift things around. You create definitions within your department that you think that are appropriate. You create law, which isn't your function, and then you come before Congress and you say that everything is fine. Well, we've been to Yuma, Arizona, sir, and we've seen the devastation down there. We've talked to people. 70 sheriffs just last year said that there is no border at all. We simply have no border left in Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California, and Texas. That's the National Sheriff's Association. You've been held to account by courts. Texas v. Biden, DHS's position, quote, position that the crisis at the border is not largely of their own making because of their more lenient detention policies is divorced from reality and belied by the evidence. Florida versus the United States in the Northern District of Florida, quote, the Biden administration have effectively turned the southwest border into a meaningless line in the sand and little more than a speed bump for aliens flooding into the country by prioritizing alternatives for detention over actual detention and by releasing more than 1 million aliens into the country. Real quick, let's play a video.
Crisis on the border that just keeps getting worse. These are live pictures of Del Rio, Texas, a town that borders Mexico, where almost 9,000 migrants are currently camping out.
Government data showing there were more than 220,000 encounters with migrants along the border last month, the highest number in 22 years.
Law enforcement leaders from federal, state, and local agencies announced Tuesday an unprecedented 2-month-long fentanyl enforcement surge along the southwest border that resulted in the seizure of more than 4,700 pounds of fentanyl.
Fentanyl being pushed through the desert around El Paso is up more than 355% compared to last year.
For the first time, fentanyl is being smuggled between the ports of entry.
There have been more than 200 people on the FBI terror watch.
Crisis on the border that just keeps getting worse.
So the numbers don't lie. 5.6 million illegal immigration or illegal alien encounters, 1.5 million known gotaways, more than 2.2 million illegal immigrants, aliens into this country, meaning that 3.6 million illegal aliens are in this country since the start of your tenure. That's astronomical. 160 countries, the people on the terror watch list that we know about, 140 just this year. It's at an all-time high. So look, this doesn't lie. These are the stats, Mr. Secretary. And so you come up here and you blame the former president, and you say that they've gutted the immigration system. You blame Congress for not acting. But you know what? These numbers weren't here for Obama. They weren't here for Trump. But they seem to be here for you. So you like to blame other people for your failures in not doing your job. And quite frankly, the American people want to know, how qualified are you to even carry out your mission? Because everybody else seems to indicate, from local law enforcement to sheriffs to ranchers to farmers to citizens on the border, when I ask them, is the border more secure? They say resoundingly no. And that's on your watch, sir. With that, I yield.
Gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman, if we could maybe just wait till the sign's taken down there, Mr. Moore, and then we'll let you have your 5 minutes with the secretary. Gentleman from Alabama is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here today. I'm certainly appalled at what's happening at the southern border, and I know my constituents are too. Your border policy is to make every state a border state. And I said my constituents are appalled, but what's happening, but I know a family who has personally been suffering the consequences of your actions. And in my district, the 2nd Congressional Districts in Alabama, the Talladega County Sheriff's Department arrested Greevy Zavala, a 29-year-old illegal alien from Honduras, for the rape of a teenage girl in Prattville, Alabama, in a restaurant. The interesting thing is Mr. Zavala identified, I guess, as a minor is what I'm being told, but he was a 29-year-old. And Mr. Secretary, why do you think it is, and I've been to the border a few times myself, that we're finding so many IDs thrown down south of the border? It's almost like if these people were coming here to apply for asylum, they'd want us to know who they were and what they were up to. but for some reason, ID after ID are just piling up south of the U.S. border. Why do you think that might be?
Congressman, first of all, I'm very sorry, of course, to learn of the tragedy that occurred, that was inflicted on a constituent of yours.
I understand that, Mr. Mayorkas, and let me say this, sir. We've been apologizing to a lot of people for a long time, at least in the last few months, last few years. Even when the other party was in charge, they had the White House, the House, and the Senate, and we're continually apologizing to parents for losing their children to fentanyl, and for people getting raped in restrooms, and for DUIs, or people who are killing people with cars who have no driver's license. And I understand the apologies, but my people, the constituents in this country, are getting tired of apologies and they want action. And so who's responsible for the death, or let's say the rape of this 14-year-old? Is that you, Mr. Mayorkas, or is that President Biden, or is it Congress? Who's responsible for that?
Congressman, the criminal who committed the act is responsible. I look forward to working with you to address the scourge of fentanyl that is causing so much devastation and death. I look forward to working with you to fix what has long been a broken immigration system.
I hear you, but let me say this, sir, and you're aware of this too. This administration has created two things on the southern border: drug mules and human trafficking. And it's the policies of this administration, because we talked about it earlier in here and you said $4,000 to $5,000. Yeah, that's just south of the U.S. southern border. In Yuma, Arizona, there's 109 different countries came through that small town. And further south of the border, they're paying the cartel $7,000 or $8,000. Syrians are paying $19,000. So the cartel's getting rich, and the American people are paying the price in the form of crimes and drug deaths. And so we can sit here and talk, and for 4 hours now, 3 hours, however long this is going on, there's a lot of apologies, but not a lot of answers. And we need answers for the American people, and I think you're to be held responsible for that. And believe me, it's not fun to have parents in here telling us how they lost their child to fentanyl poisoning, but it's on your watch, sir, and it's on our watch. And we have a responsibility to do something about that. And so, you know, it just, again, the policies, we're turning a blind eye, and people are pouring in here. Sheriff Daniels said himself in testimony a few months ago, he said the safest he's ever seen the U.S. southern border, he was a four decades on the U.S. southern border, it was around 2018. He said the worst he's ever seen is now. And so we have a responsibility to these people. Let me ask you another question. This is an individual. I just got this information. Reports in November of 2021, DHS encountered Issam Bassi, an alien on the terror watch list. Now, Mr. Bassi, despite, quote, from the FBI, highly derogatory information, end quote, this is in the FBI's database, DHS decided to release him into the U.S. because he was overweight and may have been susceptible to COVID-19. Are overweight terrorists not a threat to the U.S.?
I'm sorry, Congressman.
Are overweight terrorists? We turned Mr. Bassi loose because he was overweight and afraid he might get COVID, and he was on the FBI's list, so are they a threat, overweight terrorists?
Congressman, individuals who pose a threat to national security or public safety are detained. That is the policy
unless they're
of the
overweight.
Department of Homeland Security. That is false.
Well, that's what the report is.
I'm not familiar with that report. I look forward to reading it. Congressman, the weight of an individual is not relevant to their profile as a threat to the United States.
It is to catching COVID, though, apparently.
Congressman, allow me to repeat myself. Individuals who pose a public safety threat or national security threat are priorities for detention. That is the policy of the Department of Homeland Security.
Who's to blame for the floodgates being open on the southern border, Mr. Mayorkas?
Congressman, I look forward to working with you to fix what is clearly a broken immigration system. The issue of migration, the increase in migration, is not exclusive to the United States. During World War II, there were 60 million displaced people around the world. Now there are over 117.
We just had a report earlier today. Somebody said that there is no border anywhere on the globe that is more porous, if you will, than the United States border and more insecure. And it's on your watch, sir. And with that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman yields back. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Just a couple things to remind you. I know you have some sharp people there sitting behind you who work at the department. There's a number of things we want responses to, and I've been keeping a list throughout the things. I just want to reiterate that, and then we'll adjourn the hearing and let you get back to your office. We want to know the number of removals. Obviously, we've asked that several times, so if you could please get us that number. We will put this in some kind of written correspondence to you, but we just want to emphasize we want that number. We want to know the status of the 14,000 smugglers you referenced in your opening statement. What has happened? Is DOJ prosecuting? Have you referred them? What is the status? Have any of those individuals been arrested multiple times? We want to know the status of the 140 on the terrorist watch list this year, the 238 total over the last 2 years, what their status is, and specifically when you said the IG's report was wrong, and the IG's report said that one of these individuals on the terrorist watch list has been released into the country. We want to know specifically how you interpret and why you say the IG is wrong. Then we want to know the parole categories that Mr. Bishop raised in his questioning, how you can categorize someone and then still categorize a whole group of individuals and then say you're still going case by case to meet the law when it comes to parole. And then finally, actually two last things. The Misdis Malinformation Committee within CISA, within DHS, we want to know the activities of that group. We'll have specific questions around that. We want to know who's involved in that group, and if it's still meeting and working with social media companies in light of the court decision on July 4th from the Western District of Louisiana. And then finally, to the gentleman, Mr. Moore's question about the tragic situation of the young lady in Alabama. We wrote you about that specific situation. Mr. McClintock and I wrote you on behalf of this back on May 24th, and you've not responded to that. So we'd like a response to that previous request as well. So I think that's 7 things that the committee, both Republicans and Democrats, I believe, would like answers to. And if we'll get that to you in some kind of written letter ASAP, but now you know and you can begin working on that and get it back to us if you could.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Thank you for being here today. The committee is, without objection, all members will have 5 legislative days to submit additional written questions for the witness or additional materials for the record. Without objection, the hearing is adjourned.